Welcome to ETM Analytics' quick preview of Thursday's Kenya budget. And for this discussion, I'm joined by the co-head for Africa, Takuta Ndaona. Tux, thank you very much for joining me for this quick discussion. We know that Kenya stepped out of the chaos that was 2024 with this violent protest was sparked by the proposed tax legislation in line with an IMF deal. And you almost get the impression that Kenya has this fresh opportunity to table a new budget. But it's going to be quite tricky because with this budget, they need to appease the younger population, the Gen Z that kind of led the protest of 2024. They have to, at the same time, inspire financial backers and investors while simultaneously addressing the fiscal situation and their debt problems. And going into tomorrow's budget, Tax, I'm assuming that the debt situation of Kenya is probably one of their worst headaches at the moment.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Also, Kenya faces a high debt burden, and that's primarily due to large fiscal deficits that they have experienced over the past couple of years. If you look at this past fiscal year, the deficit is expected to be 5.1% of GDP, but then that's likely going to be revised higher because, again, Kenya missed its revenue targets and did not comply with World Bank conflict of interest bill, which required it to address graft in public office, so they didn't get that funding. That funding has been delayed, so that means more borrowing, and it's worrying given that Kenya's debt is north of 11 trillion shillings. That's quite substantial, and a large portion of their revenue is spent on servicing debt. So I expect fiscal deficits to widen even further as Kenya misses its revenue targets, and this is just likely going to exacerbate or worsen the debt burden.
With this worsening deficit, if they don't go to the IMF, because I understand why they want to sidestep the IMF, right? Because usually with an IMF loan, there are these very stringent policy and legislation like we saw with the tax policies from last year. So they kind of want to avoid a very similar situation. But, Tux, if not the IMF, then who? Where are they going to go to?
So it's quite interesting. I mean, some of their moves have been well telegraphed ahead of the budget, and they're looking at several other lenders, multilateral lenders such as the World Bank and the African Development Bank. If you look at the World Bank, their rules are less stringent. As I just mentioned earlier, there's the conflict of interest bill, which is seen as more politically less sensitive, so they're looking at World Bank funding for the next couple of years. Then you look at some of the measures they've introduced, like the finance bill of 2025 is a departure from 2024, where there were increases in taxes. I think the Ruto administration this time around is looking to raise revenue by closing tax loopholes and improving administrative efficiency. You can also look at multilateral lenders. I think Kenya has earmarked north of 60 billion shillings from several countries to fund their infrastructure projects. They're also looking at privatization. There's a strong privatization drive to sell some of the state-owned assets to the Nairobi Stock Exchange. Public and private partnerships are also an option for Kenya. That would alleviate the government being responsible for infrastructure, adding to their debt burden by being involved in these infrastructure projects. So those are some of the options that are on the table. Obviously, the IMF, Kenya is still in talks with the IMF. Just as this morning, I just saw that the IMF is coming to Kenya in September to discuss Article 4 consultation and potentially a new program. Prior to that, we had heard that the IMF is, undertaking a debt servicing analysis of Kenya to help understand their needs and see how better they can solve them. So there are quite a bit of options. And then also, if you look at Kenya's FX reserves, they've been rising quite significantly. And I think they're almost covering 5 months of import cover. So in the short term, they are able to kind of, meet their debt obligations given that they have a solid reserve base.
So not completely in the trouble yet. But if they don't make a plan soon, they could face some headwinds in the medium to longer term. If you look at Kenya's budget, just a quick overview, what would you be looking for? What would your suggestions be, I suppose, to Ruto in how to go from this being under pressure in medium term to at least getting Kenya's fiscal situation into a growing and positive trajectory?
I think the strategy they've taken, for it to be somewhat successful will hinge on a couple of things. And the first one is effective revenue mobilization. And we know that's been Kenya's weakest point historically. So if they can improve on that, that'll be great. And then in terms of prudent debt management, I think Kenya has borrowed excessively. And of late, we've seen domestic borrowing has been driving public debt. So if they can manage that, that will go some way towards, helping Kenya be on a straight and good fiscal path. But also, the external environment will play a part in this. If it becomes unfavorable, I mean, Kenya has a significant amount of external debt, which will make that fiscal consolidation or prudent debt management difficult.
It's definitely not an easy job, Tux, but we'll find out tomorrow with the tabling of the budget on where Ruto and his administration is taking Kenya's fiscal space. Tux, I'm pretty sure we're going to catch up again soon. Thank you very much for your insights.